Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
Good day to you, gentlemen, and welcome to the latest episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scott McKay. You can find us on Twitter at Scott McKay, Real Scott McKay on Instagram, Scott McKay on YouTube, on the web at www.mountaintoppodcast.com. And I also invite you to join our Facebook group at the Mountaintop Summit. With me today is a guy I've known almost 10 years, and he's originally a dude from Denmark, now living in Cyprus. And he has some very intelligent ways of thinking about human interaction and human psychology. And I know a lot of you guys out there love these shows where we really dig in and talk about erudite, smart guy stuff as it pertains to how humans relate to each other and interact with each other. And the topic of this particular show is waiting versus patience. And I'll tell you, the idea for this particular show came about from a Facebook post that my guest created where he talked about this idea in some detail. And I was so fascinated by it that after 10 years of knowing this guy, finally, it's long overdue. Like all my guests are. It seems it was long overdue to get him on the show. And this was a great way to have him on the show. So without anything further, my friend Michael Lassen from the Congruent Man program. Michael, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much, Scott. And really, really funny story how this came about. And I think very instructive too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, before we dig into your theories, I want to talk about how we met because we were on stage together in Oslo, Norway back in 2010. And we talked briefly, and that was a great gathering of men in Scandinavia. And a lot of you guys who were well known for your craft over in that part of the world really weren't well known to us in North America. And we all got to know each other, and it was really a great time.
Yeah, 100%. It was such a passion-driven event. And I think we both met a lot of really cool, intelligent, and visionary even people. So yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking about before we clicked record on this particular show is you've always had a passion for helping guys get better, both socially and with women, but have never really resonated much with the pickup artist stuff. And of course, these guys who've known me or followed our work around here for the better part of 14 years now, actually, know that I'm much the same way. For some crazy reason, I first started out listening to David D'Angelo's material and decided, hey, you know what? I have a passion for helping men get better with women also. And something that a lot of these guys don't know is I never even knew there was such thing as a quote unquote seduction community or PUA movement till after I'd been doing this for like a year. And I was friendly with those guys, even though I never really was one of them. And your story's kind of the same, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I got dragged into it literally by a friend who was one of the top pickup artists in Scandinavia, and to my horror, I realized some of the things they were doing was not what I would think a good long-term strategy for mental health and happiness. So, like one of the first things they told me, the guys who were in a 3-month program, was that they had to go out and quote unquote approach 50 women a day. And safe to say, none of them found that very empowering, to say the least. And it's interesting because they used that word approach, which is what I noticed straight away is that all of them were literally weakened just by that word. And I actually tested that their unconscious mind, their body reacted negatively to that word. And so one of the first things I did was to literally visualize doing the exact same thing that they had done, but think of it as starting a potential new adventure, which every new person you meet is a potential new adventure. And so by thinking about doing the exact same thing, but framing it as a potential new adventure, all of them were strong by it. So I got excited about seeing and getting a sense that there was something, for me to invent and do different in that area.
Yeah, so ergo the Congruent Man program, because it certainly isn't congruent to sacrifice your integrity and your values to try to trick women into a conversation. But you're so right. A lot of guys, and this comes up a lot, even with guys who want to do the right thing, is they view this idea of meeting women and trying to attract them as this almost insurmountable chore that isn't any fun at all, not anything they're excited about. It's like a necessary evil to get a woman in bed or something. You know, it's like having to go to work to make your money for a living. You know, you have to work to get a woman attracted to you. And it seems like you've definitely caught on to distilling it to something very simple and natural that men and women really are born to do and enjoy.
Yeah, and it was also that word approach, which has a lot of negativity associated to it when you think about it, because when you approach something or someone for something, it's almost implied that it's because you need something. And that's how the whole thing about the congruency, and then I chose to call it Congruent Man, came up, is that once I realized that there was something for me to do, I literally called up and started conversations with female friends of mine. And I basically flat out asked them, what's the number one thing that even if he looked like Brad Pitt, had, you know, the bank account of Warren Buffett or what have you, what would be the personality trait that would make you run away screaming? And basically all of them said, well, if he's needy, that's it. I can't live with that. I can't work with that. And then my thought was, okay, how about we start reverse engineering what needy is? And what I came up with was that, well, the opposite of needy would be knowing what you want and not being willing to compromise on it. And so that was the way I started to look at things from that point of view, because that's leadership as well, which is a known trait that has, you know, attractiveness built into it as well.
Yeah, the neediness kind of implies fear of loss. Yeah. And or lack of confidence that something's going to go your way. And of course, a woman can't feel safe and comfortable in your presence if you're fearing losing her before you even have her, and you don't have the confidence to believe that she should want you, and that he's thinking, oh God, I don't mess up, don't screw this up, because if she runs away, then you don't have any more options and you're going to be all alone. And it really is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and women can't stand it because it defies everything that masculinity should represent to turn a woman on, you know?
Exactly. I mean, it's a focus on lack, which never turns out good. And that makes her feel like, you know, she's just an object. And that's why it's so powerful for men to both have self-awareness, self-reliance, and not needing a woman to fill a hole in their life. Is that when you get to a point where you actually either love or appreciate yourself, you embrace your own life and got things going for you. And you actually don't need her. That's the spot where it becomes magic, where it becomes sort of synergistic. That 2 + 2 is not only 5, but, you know, it's a continued count upwards.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? You know, a woman wants you to have a purpose as a man. She just doesn't want to be your purpose, because that feels really
creepy.
That's
a great way of saying it. 100%.
Yeah. You know, it's outstanding that you would come up with different ways of thinking about that, because it shows that you care, and it shows that you're passionate about this, and that you find real meaning in solving these problems that guys face. And, you know, ultimately it shows that you've been there and you've struggled with it yourself, which is always something that resonates with guys everywhere. I'll tell you, guys come up to me, and I'm sure this has happened in your practice too, Michael, and they'll say, well, you know, I want to talk to a woman about this. I want to know how much to call her. We went on a great date and we had this excellent time, but now I don't know how much I should text her, or whether I should text her at all. I mean, it's another week till we see each other. When do I call her? And my answer to them is always, when do you want to call her? When do you want to text her? I mean, you're the man here. You figure it out. And they're like, well, yeah, but I don't want to look needy. And I always tell guys the same thing. You're not going to look needy unless you are needy.
Exactly.
And if you
it's
are
already
needy,
happened then.
Right. And if you are needy, you can't camouflage it. I don't care if you wait 3 days to call her. You're just waiting 3 days to look needy. And most recently, I've started adding a dimension to that conversation when it comes up like this with these guys, such that I say to them, why don't you just call out neediness in general? In other words, say to them, hey, you know what? I don't want to look needy, because I know that's like the kiss of death, and I certainly am not. So I'll tell you what, it's a week until we see each other. I don't want you to feel like I don't care about you or that I forgot about you. So when I feel like texting you and when I feel like calling you, I'm going to do so. If you pick up the phone, that's fine. But at least you'll know I'm still here and the date's still on for next weekend, because I want to make you feel safe. And guys will always be amazed by that. And they'll go, man, you make it sound so simple. I go, well, it's not complicated. You know, just call it out.
Yeah, it's a great example because it's demonstrating leadership is pointing out situations that typically would be awkward and totally, take that off the table.
Right. It's like calling out an objection in sales before the customer can have that objection. A great example in my own life is, of course, my ex-wife, as these guys know, was batshit crazy. And I didn't want to date any more crazy women. So I was always afraid that women were going to turn crazy on me. So the loss that I was fearing was that this woman I wanted to like and perhaps build some sort of friendship or sexual relationship with was going to turn out to be a nut job. Well, I decided I didn't want to attract crazy women anymore because it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I started with great fear and trepidation, Michael, irrationally, I might add, calling it out on first dates. Hey, I'm glad I'm out with you. You seem like a really nice, level-headed woman. I don't date crazy chicks. I don't entertain them in my life. And I remember the first couple times I just threw that on the table. Like, hand in your guns. We don't allow any weapons in here. Put all your weapons on the table. First time I threw that bad boy on the table, I was expecting just to get hit with shrapnel. Like, how dare you not want a crazy woman in your life? I mean, that's how codependent I had become as a human being. So I understand the irrational fear that goes along with, affecting some sort of change here. But the first few times that I actually was brave enough, and I will go ahead and use that term because it was brave for a guy like me who had been in that position for so long to come out with it so blatantly, because I was expecting women to run away. They were all going, "Oh, I am so glad you brought that up." Because I am not. I am level-headed. And let me tell you something. If you ever have a problem with that bitch in court, you call me whether we're dating still or not, and I'll stand right by you, and we'll fight for your little girl together. I'm like, wow. Because what was going on psychologically in these women's minds was if he's willing to call out, I don't want crazy people, that must mean, hey, he must not be a crazy person. He's not avoiding this conversation. He's not running away. He's running towards it. So if you're going to call out crazy women when you're trying not to be crazy anymore, the same psychology holds true, such that if you're talking to a woman and you're trying not to be needy, if you talk about neediness and throw those weapons on the table, then the woman's going to go, hey, here's a guy who doesn't tolerate neediness and he's not needy either. And the next thing you know, you've done all the heavy lifting for yourself with just a modicum of effort, right?
Yeah, and it reminds me of a distinction that I was talking about a couple of years ago. I got so fed up with all this talk about accepting, accepting who you are, accepting situations, accepting this, accepting that.
Accepting rejection.
Well, I mean, fuck accepting, because accepting can be accepting a shitty life. I don't want to accept a shitty life. I don't want to accept myself if I'm a shitty person or if I do shitty things. I don't believe you can be a shitty person. I really do believe it's more on a behavior level. But anyway, what I started talking about is the difference between accepting and embracing. So what it sounds to me like what you were doing, which is a great example, is you were embracing the situation. You weren't accepting the dynamics and the typical dynamics and all that bullshit. No, you were embracing it. So you laid it on the table and you got great results from that.
Yeah, I wasn't going to accept that women might be crazy, and I just have to accept the fact that I'm inviting them in my life. I was going to embrace the fact, like you said, that I don't want crazy women in my life anymore, and also be willing to embrace the results that come from that. If a woman is really super offended that I don't want crazy women in my life, guess what? She may be crazy, and I may be dodging that bullet. Chances are, right? Yeah. Love it. And that leads right into the central premise of today's podcast, doesn't it? Nice segue there. You have this wonderful way of talking about waiting and how guys basically are willing to accept that level of mediocrity in their life where they're just waiting for something to happen. And one of the ways that you really caught my attention with this thought process of yours, Michael Lassen, was where you talked about how most people think of waiting as a virtue, and it's really not. Talk a little bit more about this idea of waiting versus patience, because I want these guys to hear it directly from you. I want you to lay out that whole thought process for them.
Yeah, so I really believe the big distinction between waiting and patience is that waiting does not have a deadline at all. Waiting can be potentially indefinite. Like if you're waiting for Susie Q, or whoever to drop the abusive boyfriend and have a nirvana experience and see you as the greatest thing since sliced bread or what have you. That's probably not going to happen. And even miraculously, if it would, I mean, you're still at a bad place because you have not taken action. You haven't demonstrated leadership, because leadership is not about waiting. So the big difference and distinction is that patience indeed needs to have an end date, because otherwise it's not patience. So even going from waiting to patience, waiting being passive and patience being potentially really powerful. Like one of the guys I really admire in today's society, Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a very well-known social media expert and business guru, what have you. He talks about patience being a virtue. I mean, he has a great story himself. But then even patience, what I thought that, well, and this is one of my favorite questions, is that if I could do something better than that, what would it be? And for me, it's about going from patience, like starting with waiting, to patience, and then getting to a place of knowing. Like knowing you are on a path, knowing that no matter what happens, you can embrace it instead of accepting it, and knowing who you are and where you're going, and knowing that you don't have to be perfect, because if you were, you would scare all women away pretty much, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that the difference between accepting your story, if you accept your story and where you're at, that can be an unbelievably, difficult place to be at. You can be stuck for life. But if you embrace it, that presupposes that you take something from it and you can use that as leverage of moving forward. So even just a simple wordplay like that of accepting versus embracing and going from patience to knowing can really make a big difference. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing this, because this is something that can make a difference in of itself. It doesn't require any therapy or whatever. It's something where intelligent guys can take that and can literally change things just from those small distinctions.
I think the kernel of powerful truth in what you're talking about is, it seems almost like the holy grail for retrieving your lost personal power as a man. And You hear it all the time in circles, in men's dating advice circles. You need to get your power back. Don't give your power away. Phraseology like that. And what I'm reminded of is the adage that I've always lived by, even back to when I was in the business world, of when you're going to make a decision, think first, what would your competitor be most afraid for you to do? And then you do it. And I'll tell you something. If there's a woman who's out with this jerky guy and their boyfriend, girlfriend, and you're just waiting for them to break up someday, that's exactly what he would love for you to do.
Yeah.
Just hang out and wait, dude, because you're being passive. Now, are you going to go run boyfriend destroyer game or some sort of pickup artist stuff on him? No, not necessarily.
No, because that's needy.
Yeah, that would be needy. Absolutely. But you're also not going to shy away from that. You're going to be patient. I'm guessing, and I want you to riff on this, but I'm guessing you'd want to be patient in the sense where you're looking for the right time and the right opportunity. In other words, you're not just rushing in like a bull in the china shop and making yourself look foolish or stupid in a way that he's going to be able to easily shoot you down and she won't be attracted to. But you're watching and you're being patient. And when the time comes, you are going to act, because as you're patient, as you're watching what unfolds in their relationship, you're going to start seeing the flaws in that relationship. You're going to observe ways that he's not treating her right. So when your time comes where you have an opportunity to interact with her in the right way, you're going to be planting those seeds where you should be the guy in her life instead of him. And that's what he's not going to be comfortable with you doing. That's what he's not going to like, because it's going to challenge his role in her life in a way that's her decision and your decision, not something that he has dominion over. So in other words, you are getting your power back in that position. Even though you don't have the woman yet, you're doing it in a way that puts you in the position of strength instead of weakness. I love it. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what embracing is. It's extracting and getting the best out of a situation. And one of the other things that happened when I started to working with these poor guys who were in this 3 months coaching program that, again, let's say it didn't exactly empower them. That's why I was called in the first place, is that, and I remember this so vividly. I was having a coaching session with the first one, and he told me about it. And I said, well, how about we look at it this way, is that before you start the potential new adventure, you think about it like this. Only 3 positive things can happen, and you can embrace all of them. Is that 1, you get your outcome, presupposing he had an intention and a goal, whatever that was. That's not for me to judge whether he wanted to get laid that night or start a potential beautiful adventure or get her number. All right with me. Second one is that he didn't get that goal or intention, but there's something he could learn from that. And maybe that was something that he needed in order to get to his longer term goal, which, is one of the things that most millionaires have in common, is that they have failed first, and then they've learned something crucial from that failure that they then apply in the new endeavor that ends up being successful. So sometimes that could be even better. And then the third cool thing that can happen is that you don't get your outcome. There's absolutely nothing you can learn from it. And I even remember for a split second, I was thinking, what the fuck am I going to say next? But then it just came out and I said, the third thing that can happen is that you don't get either of the first 2, but you can use it as a practice of one of the most important skills we can ever have, which is to keep our focus where it empowers us the most. So that means for those guys back then that instead of looking at it as, I have to go out and approach 50 women a day, it's like, no, you have to go out and collect 50 new small building blocks in your foundation, because you now have the control of turning it into something that's going to empower you. Either you get what you wanted, there's something you can learn, or you use it as practice of keeping your focus where it empowers you the most. And they were like, holy shit, that was a game changer. And I've used that ever since, like working with poker players, salespeople, business people, what have you, because it's literally something you can pre-frame for any action that you take, where any sort of fear could chime in. Because what's to fear when you have the control of literally no matter what happened, you have the control to turn it into something that can empower you. That's embracing versus accepting what happens.
And Michael, there's so much grown-up wisdom in what you're talking about. Everything you're describing is the opposite of immature boyhood.
Yeah.
Hey, let's run down there and get one. Like we were talking a couple of podcasts ago about the 2 bulls on the hill, the old bull and the young bull.
Yeah.
Instead, you are acting on the wisdom of knowing how to live life skillfully. I have had the fortune, like I've talked about on this show, the privilege of working with at least 3 Navy SEALs during my tenure as a coach. And what I've noticed, and indeed what they've confirmed verbally with me, because I talked to them about it, is that they become very good at what you're talking about, being patient and all the while being very attentive, watching, gleaning every bit of information and knowledge they can out of any situation out there, because that knowledge is power. That wisdom is power. And that's why the world's most elite fighting force, arguably, but certainly we revere the Navy SEALs in the United States as probably our highest end warriors.
Yeah.
Our most elite warriors. And what they do is they're patient. They don't rush in. They don't just go kick in doors and storm it, woo-ha, because we want to do it. And because we're getting sick of waiting, they turn that waiting into an opportunity in their patience to gain information. And that information and that power allows them to be so much more effective when the time to actually move and engage the enemy in combat comes. It's fascinating and so powerful, and it just reeks of manhood in the best way possible.
Yeah, and the other thing to take that to potentially even a higher level is to look at if you need patience. And, I agree with you, patience can absolutely be a good thing. And I think there's an even higher level is that if you're enjoying what you're doing, and if you are on, a personal growth path, whatever you want to call it, and you enjoy the journey of life, then the question becomes, do you really need patience? Because sometimes if we actually embrace it, again, that's the key word, if we embrace the journey, that can be far more pleasurable than having the end goal. Because a lot of times getting the end goal can have like anywhere from an hour to a couple of days, maybe even a couple of weeks of happiness of achieving a goal. But then, you're stuck until you get the next goal, if that's what you're depending your happiness on. So I also feel that it's a very empowering way of looking at your life in terms of the whole journey thing, or even a hero's journey, which that's a passion of mine too, is taking, being a hero into a more normal contextual context instead of being this one-time heroic thing, that it's more like you can actually be a hero by doing small commitments every single day. That might be another conversation. So back to the patience things is that if you love what you do, if you love yourself, or at least appreciate yourself and embrace, because that's this whole thing about loving and accepting yourself. Yeah, that can be quite hard, especially if you compare yourself to other people's best version of themselves, aka social media. But if you can embrace where you're at and you can appreciate things about yourself, that will do the trick, because that's part of being on a journey. And when you focus on the journey, the neediness for patience and waiting is just off the table, because then you know that you're in a good place, because you don't need the external validation. You don't need the external goals, because you've taken self-reliance on your own happiness. And once you do that, even Harvard studies, research showed that if you're happy first versus going after goals in order to being happy, nope. It's the other way around. It's much easier working on your happiness first, because then you're going to get your goals faster. And, that's what I'm so passionate about bringing to the table, and especially in this context, because it makes it so much more win-win-win for everybody. And it makes it so easy to see who's the right fit for you and who's not.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. First of all, there's nothing heroic about wishing all your days away and not enjoying the journey. I'm reminded of all those people who avoid world travel because they loathe the idea of a 14-hour flight from here to South Asia. It's like, come on,
God,
man.
that's
deal with it. It's worth it. I mean, these guys will go work in a boring ass job all day long, 5 days a week, but they won't sit on an airplane and watch movies for 14 hours. I mean, you may argue there's a deeper fear there, but I've heard that excuse so many times. Hey, I've learned to really enjoy airplanes and aviation and foreign flight attendants, and I end up sometimes hoping the plane won't land for another couple hours. Now, I may be a little weird, but I've learned to literally enjoy the journey and see my journey as starting when I leave for the airport, not when I land and disembark at the final destination. And I think a lot of people need to have a clearer visibility into life being more like that than, okay, all of this that we're going to classify as waiting or patience or whatever you two guys over here on this podcast want to call it, these guys are thinking out there, it's all the same to me. I just want to get to the main point. It's like, I want this woman naked in my bed. I want to have an orgasm. It's like, okay, look, the orgasm is going to be 45 seconds if you really, really know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Seducing her, enjoying the moment, unwrapping the gift, foreplay, that could take all day if you know how to enjoy it. And I'll tell you, here's a hint, guys, she'll enjoy it. She won't even see it as you being patient. She'll see it as you knowing what you're doing.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we're so dead set on the end goal and the celebration that comes with that end goal that we would literally wish our days away. Kind of like Adam Sandler in that movie Click, where he has a fast forward button through his whole life.
Yeah, that's a beautiful movie.
If we all had that fast forward button, we'd be dead. We'd been dead for 5 or 6 years now, some of us. Maybe more.
We'd have 7 days of amazing lifetime, but
we would be in the ground. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this whole idea of enjoying the journey. You mentioned Gary Vaynerchuk. I had a personal conversation one-on-one with Gary V one time where we were talking about this idea of really leveraging small successes towards the larger ones. And this is a concept we've talked about on this show, but I happen to have talked to Gary V about that one time. And it was like, yeah, I still remember the very first time someone bought my book and I didn't know who they were. And I was like, yeah, man. And Gary was like, oh yeah, you crushed it. I mean, that was the goal and you met it. And I'm not sure if it was in that particular conversation, but I know I've ruminated on the idea before that when people come to me and they say, well, I would love for you to teach me how you started and built your online business, Scott. And I'll go, well, what's your goal? Well, I want to be the next Tony Robbins. It's like, well, if that's your first step, you're going to fail miserably because you're not going to be able to enjoy anything along the way. But if the first time someone ever joins your internet newsletter mailing list who you don't know excites you, then a lot of it will be exciting. And certainly even in the business world, I remember the first time the firm I was working for won $1 million job. every step of the way. You know, when they cut down the 30 bidders to a short list, we were like, hey, we can always say we made the short list of bidders for $1 million job. And the guys around me were like, oh, great. But then they started getting into the vibe of how I was victory centered. I was victory focused, not focused on the worry and the fear of loss. And sure enough, we ended up winning that deal and many more behind it. And in hindsight, Michael, it really had a lot to do with the exact same kind of mindset I sort of stumbled across back then that you're talking about now. Another thing that I'm reminded of, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, just because it's a cool quote from a really cool guy. I am reminded of the quote from the actor and motorsports enthusiast and racer, Steve McQueen, which is one of his most famous ones. In his movie Le Mans, which is pretty much a vehicle, if you'll pardon the bad pun, for auto racing, you know. Yeah. Great movie just because of the Ferraris and the Porsche 917s in it racing and the sound of it. I mean, turn the sound up when you watch that old movie.
By the way, Scott, imagine if the way that you described that made me go, you know, I can only imagine if you got even like 15 or 20% of that excitement into like your daily quote unquote mundane tasks. I mean, that would be magic.
One of my friends from high school, who I reconnected with on Facebook, paid me the most wonderful compliment I've probably heard in years. He said, "You always enjoyed being alive more than anybody I've ever met."
That
isn't that cool?
I don't even know what to say. That's an amazing
I got
compliment.
chills. I was like, gosh, it's so cool that someone would notice that. But yeah, I'm a really curious person and I love all sorts of things ad nauseum, sometimes to the eye-rolling boredom of other people, but you know, that's no problem. But anyway, in this movie, Steve McQueen's great quote, and he delivers it so wonderfully. You can find it on YouTube. Maybe I'll go ahead and find the link to this quote and post it on the show notes page for these guys. And of course, everybody in this movie, despite the death-defying antics, and indeed someone dies at the beginning of the movie, that kind of casts a pall over the whole thin plot line. And the plot line is indeed very thin for this movie. Like I said, it's a racing movie. But he says to the widow of the gentleman who had died racing cars the previous year, he goes, you know, she's wondering aloud why they do it. You know, you're not saving the world. You're not stopping a horrible regime from taking over the world. You're just driving a bunch of cars around looking for a waving checkered flag. And he's trying to explain to her the mindset of the racer. And he says to her, racing is life. Everything else is just waiting. And as powerful a statement that is, in terms of getting inside the mind of someone who's just addicted to racing, it's really rather sad, isn't it? Because the amount of time you spend racing, no matter what it is you're racing, is going to be relatively small. Everything else is preparing. Everything else is tuning the cars, testing the tires, doing interviews, pimping the sponsors, whatever you do, relaxing. But to a racer, until they're racing, it's just waiting. And I am processing that quote through the filter of everything you're talking about and considering how we have a family of little racers around here. I mean, we don't race Porsche 917s for Gulf Porsche. We're pedaling little bikes around. But still, to a 7-year-old, it must feel like Le Mans to be out there, you know, at a national level with all these sponsors. And they put a hat on your head when you're at the end, when you're taking pictures on the podium. And my kids and I tune our bikes together. We ride around the neighborhood. We train. We celebrate all the little things that prepare for actual racing. I mean, when they're hanging around with their kids in the neighborhood, they get to feel love from their peers because of the accomplishments. All of those things are part of being a person who races. And it culminates in the racing. So we have patience towards race day, but we're also not wishing the days away leading up to it. We're busy doing things we like to do, or indeed indulging in other things in life that make life worthwhile, so that we don't get this tunnel vision that, oh my God, the only thing that matters in the world is racing, 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 racing. Because like I said, there is a sad component to that Steve McQueen quote that makes people think, you know, why don't you guys just get a life? You know, there's more to life than just this one dimension, right?
Well, it reminds me of, I remember hearing you quoting Joseph Campbell in one of your podcasts, where he talks about that the cave you fear entering holds the key to, I don't remember the exact quote, but something like it holds the key to your kingdom or freedom. And it sounds to me like that's what's happening. What you guys are doing is that you are embracing, instead of like the quote you just mentioned, that he was fearing everything else besides racing.
Kind of true, right?
If he had done what you guys, sounds to me like you're doing, is that you're embracing all the little things and you're seeing them as small pieces of the bigger puzzle. And then you have the payoff day. But it's also like, just like you mentioned earlier about foreplay, that's actually part of the game. And to the extent that you learn to not only just quote unquote enjoy that, but embrace it as the build up, it all works.
Well, I think ultimately it's a matter of not feeling like it's waiting at all.
Exactly. Yeah, it's embracing.
Waiting itself may be a psychological construct vis-a-vis what's really happening around you if you're willing to stop and smell the roses and enjoy your life doing something else while you're being, wait for it, patient for the outcome you want in this other area. That's fascinating too, isn't it?
Yeah, because it leads to something more.
Yeah.
That's going to be ever expanding.
And yeah, there's masculine power, virtue, and patience in that too. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. We're out of time, Michael, but I love how this very philosophical conversation has also lended some very practical elements, and I'm sure the guys will appreciate that. I want to go ahead and point the guys to your website where they can find out more about the Congruent Man program and get a free report from you, which of course is absolutely worthwhile. So guys, go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com/congruent, CONGRUENT, where you'll find out more about Michael Lassen and get his free report. What's the free report about, Michael?
Well, it's about a lot of things we've covered today, and a lot about what I see is the big crux in this whole thing, which is that a lot of guys, unfortunately, were taught things to do and things to say in order to get results that they needed, where I flip it around to being about who you are and embracing that and knowing what you want, not be willing to compromise on it. And yeah, I mean, it's to be honest, I've really been dragged into this pretty much all the way through as sort of the reluctant hero story. So this is not my main focus by any stretch. But I realized recently with all the things that come up with, the whole toxic masculinity thing, the Me Too movement, the fact that women don't need men anymore because, they can get kids on their own and all that stuff, is that I really believe that we're on a brink of something that's really, really exciting in terms of old patterns falling away. And I'm really passionate about, throwing in what I see as potential solutions, because I don't believe that you can focus on a problem and a solution at the same time. And I want to present in this report what I believe is the solution. It's really what I believe can make a difference for men these days. That's a win-win-win. It's a win for men, it's a win for the women, and it's a win for, the potential kids that's going to be a result of it.
Well, I'll tell you, you're a very intelligent, thoughtful man, I can tell. Because you're not only talking about all these lofty points, you're doing it in your second language, which I'm always impressed by, because I speak Spanish, but I don't speak Spanish in a way where I could be profound in it. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing to me always. And you guys from Scandinavia are always such wonderful English speakers. You guys from Scandinavia and also from the Netherlands seem like you speak English better than we do. It's crazy. But that aside, I love the fact that you're taking this idea of toxic masculinity and perhaps the confusion and shame wrought by the Me Too movement on the part of men in general, how we're feeling inadequate and that maybe our masculinity isn't up to snuff. And you're putting something out there that is a solution. And I think that alone is groundbreaking, because so many times, at least in the politically correct world of gender politics, guys are just told to stop it and not given anything to replace it with.
Yeah,
that seems to be the problem with the whole house of cards. And yet here you are, you're putting something out there that really puts an idea into practice and into motion, which guys can use to be a better man. So when someone confronts them with, you need to do better, well, here's how, without sacrificing your masculinity, without cutting your balls off to do it. And I love that about you. I think that's wonderful.
A big passion of mine to mention to people is that, a happy, fulfilled life really only requires one potentially significant other, like 5 close friends, and 1,000 people who resonate with you if you have your own business.
And a whole lot of gratitude.
Exactly. Yeah. Appreciation. And when we think about the fact that we're 7.8 billion people on this planet, and we think about that, last time I checked, the Flat Earth Society had 20,000 members, paying members even. Abduction of UFO victims had 10,000. I think all of us can find 1,000 people we can resonate with, should we choose to have our own business.
Right.
We can definitely find 5 close friends. I mean, just even on your Facebook group, like talking about communities and people who think alike. And even if all you had was everything we talked about today, everybody would be able to find one significant other.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, look at all the creative new ways we have to kill ourselves, and yet, voila, the population keeps climbing, right? Yeah. Something tells me in a world where we're all connected on social media, we can find our tribe somewhere, or at least our echo chamber. But yeah, man, great words, great wisdom. And guys, definitely go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com/congruent, CONGRUENT, and take everything you can from Michael Lassen. Great stuff, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been just a wall of fantastic content, and I think these guys are really going to appreciate this particular episode. Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Scott. I loved it.
And guys, you know what? I have to ask the inevitable question. You ready? You know what's coming. What are you waiting for, right? We've talked about waiting is not exactly something virtuous in this particular show. If you have no deadline on when you're going to get this part of your life handled and get better with women, let me introduce you once again to the idea of being patient, waiting for the time to come, and when that time comes, seizing the day. Carpe diem is Latin for seize the day. And that's what I'm going to invite you to do right now. Have you had enough? Are you sick of time and time again watching the same pattern unfold when you go out with women? Well, if there's a pattern unfolding, the good news is you can do something about it. You can look in the mirror, like my man Steve McQueen at the end of his other movie, Bullet, realize you have the integrity, you have the personal power to be able to grab life by the horns and take care of this thing. And that's what I'm going to invite you to do, is stop waiting and, hell, start racing, man. Give me a call. Get on my calendar. Go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com. Click the red button in the upper right-hand corner. Get on the phone with me for 25 minutes. Let's talk about where you are right now, what your goals are, where you want to be, the kind of woman you want to have in your life. And like so many other guys have over the 14 years preceding this one, get that woman into your life. Make it happen. It's all there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com, and I look forward to talking to you personally real soon. You'll find I'm exactly the guy you think I'm going to be. I don't play a fictional character on this show. I am who I am, and I'm sure we'll have a great time talking about you, where you are right now, and where you want to be.
And Scott, I'm not going to say I'm sorry for interrupting. What I am going to say is that, guys, and we haven't rehearsed this or anything, is that, like I talked about, the knowing part is that you know 2 things. You know that you can be more in your life. And you also know that Scott has some things that can help you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have listened to this show all the way through. It's just a matter of fact. So please take him up on it. I mean, it's such a gracious offer for his time, because time is the most valuable thing we have, because that cannot be replaced. So he's not going to have this forever. So please know the right thing to do is to say yes.
Saying yes is life. Everything else is just waiting.
Exactly. It is. I mean, that's the perfect ending to this.
Yeah, man. Thanks. Appreciate that vote of confidence. So guys, mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again on the next episode, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.